Hey, gentlemen.
Hey, what's up,
Hey,
man?
How we doing?
I love the background. You got it all in, man. That's great.
Man, we got the I got the phone booth here at the on the side of the office, and
Well,
so it's a great spot for good acoustics. So I
I
figured
love it.
this is the place.
nice.
That's cool, man. I was just telling Bobby, I'm like, shoot, I don't have any weed or anything for today. So damn it,
Well, look, it's
I'm
not
trying to be
about
supportive, man.
it's not about the cannabis. It's about the cash and the banking. I always like to say. So
Okay, first question, man. Like, and I can't get over this. Why is this such like a weird topic? Like everybody goes, ugh, when this topic comes up.
I don't know. Everybody wants to get out there and talk about cryptocurrencies and all these other topics, and everyone's talking about the volume for crypto. But at the end of the day, most of the volume that they're talking about for crypto is trading volume. It's not retail transactional volume, I'm not really sure is the answer. It's the industry's got a stigma, but ultimately it's a $20 billion industry here in the U.S. for U.S. sales, and it's growing at like 30 to 40% annually. And so, the stigma is definitely changing as the opportunity landscape changes, right? It's an industry, and when it comes to banking, banking is a public safety concern. And so, the fact that early on in the industry, and a lot has changed in cannabis and in banking since cannabis was initially legalized, and it's hard to think back to the 90s when California first did this, right? And it's certainly a different landscape today than it was back then. But back then, they were literally hiding cash, in safes and under mattresses and in the backyard. And we take it for granted here in the United States that access to banking is just a granted, right? We just take it for granted. It's just a given that you're going to get access to banking. But we see in an industry when they lack access to banking that there's actually they're actually targeted by criminals, not because the product they deal with that they sell to consumers, but because they have lots of lightly secured cash on hand that criminals find to be an easy target. And so, ultimately, when we founded this company back in 2017 was when Arkansas legalized. That's where we're headquartered, is Little Rock. And as we were thinking about it, because we all had to kind of cross that chasm mentally of I never intended on being in the cannabis industry, but ultimately as we sat down and thought about it and really considered what was the world like if we weren't out there solving that problem, we were worried about what Arkansans would have to deal with whenever they got into the cannabis industry, and they found themselves to be potentially a target of crime. But ultimately, that is not a reality that came to the state of Arkansas, because from day one we made sure that they were banked. And so of course, we're now well beyond the state of Arkansas, but this is where we were founded, and this was our first market that we went to market in.
I love it, man. Well, look, so Brian Bauer, Abaca, right? We've obviously known you for a long time. Do you want to give a little backdrop? I mean, you're not from the cannabis industry. You're a banking guy, right? Which I think is super cool. And I know you're a co-founder, probably more from that other world, right? So you want to talk a little bit about y'all's backgrounds and how all this got started?
Yeah. I never intended on being in the cannabis industry. I'm a FinTech guy. And I kind of cut my teeth with the Venture Center and, running the FIS FinTech Accelerator and the ICBA's program over at the Venture Center, where I met a ton of awesome bankers, a ton of great entrepreneurs, met so many folks around the financial services industry that really, I can't sing the praises of those folks enough, right? Not only the people that I was able to meet through the Venture Center, but also the team over at the Venture Center, Daniel and Wayne and all those guys and the rest of the team there. That is what really gave us a purview into financial services to understand where we could connect the dots and connect a compliance concern with a technology solution and ultimately bring those together. But, we had this creative collision that happens in environments like that. That's when you bring enough people together and eventually you reach this critical mass of folks that are interested in doing cool stuff in a place like a tech park. and eventually you bump into each other. And he had a purview, on the legal side and the regulatory side. I had a purview that kind of lent towards the technology side and finding a fintech solution. And then we had another couple of co-founders from the banking world. Our partner John is a former community banker, former community bank president and CEO. And then our other partner, Greg Ellis, who was, has been coding financial services software for 20 years and has 2 businesses in that space, mostly on the mortgage side, definitely not on the cannabis side. So it was new for everyone. But, ultimately we put our heads together in that tech park and understood that the problem at its core was this compliance problem. And that if we could scale our ability to solve that compliance problem, we could unlock products and services in the financial world for this industry.
Bobby, I have a question for you, and tell me if I'm crazy. Is this like, and Brian may hate this, I don't know, but is this not reminiscent of like banking as a service and what's going on with partners versus fintech? Yeah. It's so cool, right?
That's exactly what I was going with it. Just it looks like a fintech BaaS sponsor bank relationship when you kind of look at what Abaca is doing with their bank partners, right? So I'd love to hear more about that, but I'm with you, Tanner. It's almost like they're a BaaS infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
But for cannabis.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, ultimately we're helping our banks go to market on this front. And we've not just partnered with one bank. We've got 3 bank partners today working on 4th and 5th. And, the results of the partnership are pretty incredible, right? Our first bank partner, we've added 50%, or I've actually doubled their net income as an institution. Nice. We've added about 30% to their deposit base. And when you look at the challenges for community banks, going after the space or looking at cannabis and deciding whether or not to get in, there is that technology challenge. They understand that there's an opportunity here, but most community banks are not ready to scale a high risk compliance team in addition to not having the technology to be able to address this.
When you got to feel that a lot of the technology folks, the current players, aren't playing here. And a lot of the technology that exists is not banking folks. I mean, that's what you bring, right? Above all else, you're from the banking technology space. You're one of us, man, And so, I mean, there's a trust factor that comes there. I mean, if I'm a community banker, I would work with you literally, and I wouldn't even consider working with anybody else because you're from our world, man. You're one of us. That's a big difference. Is that a fair? You see that?
I appreciate that. And no, it is, right? I mean, we understand inherently that these banks are challenged with, they want to service this industry. It's not that just that they want to capitalize on the industry. They want to serve the industry too, but it's a challenge because they don't have that high risk banking team to manage a high risk deposit portfolio. So we're bringing not only the people and the processes together and the policies, but we're also bringing the technology in, and we're working together in partnership with that community bank. And it's a great, they're built on relationships ultimately, because this is a high risk industry. You're having to bring in a trusted partner to help you execute on this, and to help you manage the deposit relationship, help you manage these customers and scale the compliance operations. But ultimately it's built on a relationship with these community bankers that we're partnered with today.
I love it. Bobby, back to the fintech infrastructure theme or banking as a service theme, it's just a different niche, right? I mean, but the challenges look very similar. I think if you look at the parts and pieces that you're trying to work around, you need the regulated institution. I think, Brian is nailing this compliance problem and how to think through it. And then if you look at let's just call it the cannabis side, it's not dissimilar from a fintech or a brand and looking at them like a business, right? We're just trying to extend our banking services to these very unique businesses.
Yep. Spot on.
I mean, these are businesses just like any other business, right? These are, private individuals pulling their capital together to go to market and sell a product that is a regulated product. And, from our standpoint, they deserve normalized financial services access just like anybody else, right? Just like any other retail store or other wholesale or B2B business. They run into a lot of the same problems and a lot of unique problems as well that they run into, just given the strange dynamic that the cannabis industry finds itself in here in the United States. But At the end of the day, they deserve access to banking. They deserve to be able to put their capital in a safe place, in a deposit account where it belongs, and ultimately not under in a safe in their basement or under a mattress or in the backyard, buried in the.
This is just a newer space.
Yeah.
And luckily, I think for you guys, it's one that's expanding. I don't know if you guys saw, I'm sure you did, Brian, the House bill. It was either going for vote or passed or something, right? At a national level on different, legalization topics. So, I mean, this continues to come up more and more. We're seeing more states passing. I mean, things are getting interesting, and
the
future is really.
Yeah, about 40 states have some form of federal, or not a federal legal, but of some form of legalization at the state level, whether it's a medical program, a full-on adult use recreational program. Some of them you find like a low THC limit, or they're very restrictive programs. But it's in total about 40 states now that have done this in some way, shape, or form.
It's a big difference. I mean, look at it, to your point, look at the last 20 years, and I think you could probably get a pretty good guess for what the next 20 is going to look like. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely don't like to make political predictions. It's a weird landscape. We've seen stuff come up that passes the House repeatedly, whether it's safe banking, which I know a lot of the bankers know about and have been watching safe banking. There's one called the States Act that sometimes pops up. There's one that is the latest from Senator Schumer, which is a bill that is likely going to run ahead of safe banking, at least until the midterms. But it's possible that we get some type of reform this year. Likely not going to be a full-scale legalization bill, but you might end up right before the midterms with safe banking slipping through. But it seems that everything gets held up in the Senate, and that's always true, right? But it looks like the Senate is holding out for a larger reform bill. But a lot of the folks who are close to Washington that we talk to say that it's probably going to be that bill's probably not going to pass. The Schumer bill is probably not going to pass. That it'll probably end up being safe banking right before the midterms. But there's 100 people that have said that and been wrong for the last 5 years about it. So don't place any bets on it or anything like that.
I love it. What are you hearing from bankers on that topic? I mean, if you're a community banker sitting in that chair today, how would you be thinking about this?
Yeah. I talk to a lot of community bankers. Most of them are admittedly cannabis curious, right? They're exploratory. They want to understand what is really required. Ultimately, if you're a community banker, what you're thinking about is the FinCEN guidance, the patchwork of laws that are on the individual state level, and you're kind of deciding what market or markets you want to serve, depending on kind of where your service area is as a community bank. It's not just the fact that cannabis has this disparity between state and federal law, right? It's not just that. It's also the fact that because of that disparity, they lack access to a lot of financial services, and it's transacted a lot in cash. And so ultimately, it's almost a double whammy for the cannabis industry that, one, you've got this, massive compliance concern around enhanced due diligence. And there is some federal guidance that exists from the Treasury Department. There's a FinCEN memo from 2014 that tells banks how they can, compliantly bank this industry. It's not a legal safe harbor, but it is guidance from FinCEN that many banks have put to use today. But it's also the cash, right? How do I track and reconcile and understand the source of these deposits? Because my customers are going to be coming in with large volumes of cash, and ultimately, as a bank, you've got to understand the source of funds here, and understand, and even the FinCEN guidance calls this out, understand that the deposits that are coming in are consistent with the state legal business practice of that cannabis business. So if you sold, $250,000 worth of product last month, and you're depositing, $400,000 this month, there's a red flag, right? We've got to find out what's the gap. Why are you depositing more money than what you sold? And ultimately, this is the heart of what is the compliance problem for banks, is understanding and reconciling business activity to deposit and transactional activity in a bank account. And so, ultimately that was the first problem we went after to solve is figuring that piece out. And then of course there's the enhanced due diligence on beneficial owners and the business monitoring that you need to do in order to make sure that the program that you have is locked up tight. And so, you can't have a lot of cracks in the dam here, or really any cracks in the dam when it comes to serving this industry. You really have to run a tight ship as far as compliance is concerned. Once you do that, you can satisfy the regulators. Our bank partners have been through multiple FDIC exams at this point in time. Our program is, continuously passed with flying colors, and they've been good partnerships.
And all those banks are still there, man. I love it.
Yeah, they're still there. They're still serving the industry. There's been no bank to date that has ever been had any type of enforcement action against it simply for serving the cannabis industry. There was a credit union that got a cease and desist from the UNA, and they got a cease and desist ultimately because they weren't doing any compliance or enhanced due diligence at all. So, you gotta have a program, and I think most of your audience probably knows that. Most of your audience are probably good community bankers who understand what their obligations are, but you do find some out there sometimes that don't have, smaller community banks that might not have a lot of other business lines that really want to jump into the industry and see the economic opportunity. But if you don't put the compliance program first and understand how you're going to serve the industry, then what you end up finding out is a lot of those banks jump in, and 6 months later they're jumping out because they realize that, even though they were able to generate some deposits and make some fee income, it was costing them a lot of money, and ultimately they weren't doing enough or going far enough to monitor these accounts.
Right. Now, I often think, man, with just technology in general, I think for a long time in community banking, we all thought that the goal of technology was to automate people. Not a topic that I really like. I like to think technology is more about making people go further. And I think it's a great way to think about your topic here. I mean, anything in compliance, we all know that's a mess and a maze. You got a cool side of this that's almost outside IP, right? Like bringing in an advisor, so to speak, somebody that's an expert at this topic, and then baking that knowledge into software. Cool. I think that fits a lot better with that theme of making my people go further. And really, you're just talking about I'm sure every community bank has, what they need to serve their current markets in their compliance department. They just don't necessarily have this knowledge base or skill set. And so you guys have to bring that in. Cool.
No, I mean, you're 100% right. It's just different. It's a niche, and this niche has its own compliance concerns, but there's also some go-to-market aspects that I think are beneficial to banks as well, as, being able to understand and source good quality accounts. We understand the landscape broadly from a national perspective. And so I think we can use that purview and use our, 4 or 5 years of experience in this industry. We just crossed $2.3 billion in total transactional volume through the Abaca platform. So we've built that knowledge, and the banks that we partner with, that we're partnering with now and in the future, they get to definitely benefit from, from our early experience where, we were learning. We did have to go through a learning curve ourselves to understand how to scale risk and compliance and how to balance that with customer service and having a program that served the customer while protecting the bank.
Hats off to you is probably an understatement. It's just look, a lot of us go out and we find much smaller problems to work on and solve, right? That are a little bit lower risk to us. I mean, you guys went to change an industry with a really big problem.
You never really know what you're getting into when you kind of get into it. And, I think we knew it was a big problem, but you can kind of know something factually, but not really realize how massive it is. And, once we got into the industry and once we started going to market, we just, you put one foot in front of the other, and then you look back and, it's, $2.3 billion worth of process volume. And it's, hard to believe for even us. Right.
Do you have a good feel on just the dollars of the space, right? Like, I'm sure that, you mentioned 0.3% THC or less. So sort of the hemp market versus the more regulated cannabis side. I'm thinking a dispensary, obviously see a little bit on the hemp farmer side. I mean, what is the total dollars of all of this that goes through in the different little niche markets that you see? What does that look like?
That's a good question. I mean, nationally, it's 20 billion in retail sales. It's growing 30 to 40% year over year, which is an insane growth rate for an industry, and it's quite unique in that way. I mean, it's comparable in some ways to high-speed internet or to cable television as far as like compound annual growth of the industry is concerned. And it's estimated that it's going to get up to, before the end of the decade, about 80 billion in retail sales. And that's just retail. There's a whole bunch of extra volume in wholesale that's going on to, underneath that retail to get to that retail number. So, you're actually probably looking at eventually over 100 billion in US transactional volume that's going to be cannabis.